See that you're born an Italian if you want your life to be great. See that you're born an Italiano and your life will be great.
How about some Donadell?
That's a nice.
Paisani, and welcome back to another episode of the Italian American Podcast. I'm John Viola, along with my partner in crime, the Italian American Wikipedia, Mr. Patrick O'Boyle, and a special guest host today. You've seen him before on 2 episodes in the past, Mr. Brandon Ficarra, who's an addition here to the Red Sauce Studio team at the Italian American Podcast. So thank you for he is a sage.
He's a sage.
I don't know what that is, but I appreciate it.
Yeah, it sounds good though.
You've become a fast friend of our little Avengers here. You know, we've all kind of spend a lot of time together and do some projects. And
can you use the word Avengers, or is that?
I'm probably trademarked. We're probably going to get in trouble.
Hold
but
on,
well, I got to introduce you still. Hold on. We got another guest here today who warrants introduction. If you're not aware of this man already, Mr. Tony Nonno is an Italian-American jack of all trades, I think is the way to say it. He does a lot of different things throughout the community. Renaissance man. He'd rather I say Renaissance. Let's put Nikki Flash Renaissance man at the bottom next time you show Tony Nonno like a big Renaissance man. And it's true. He's a filmmaker. He is a historian. He is a community leader and really active in the preservation of a lot of our culture. And yeah, you're kind of everywhere. So welcome to the show. It's been a long time coming.
It's a real pleasure. But I just want to clarify one thing. You called him a sage?
He called him a sage.
So I just want to clarify. You know what that means? You're a spice. You're a little green powder spice that they put on this food. That's what sage is.
It feels reductive, but I'll take it. I'll take it still.
You know, it's.
I wasn't going that way, but you know,
That's it. So
far be it
anyway,
for me to block Tony's train.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, look, the Renaissance man says it.
Isn't that what
Gotta
you're?
be true.
He can do miracles. We've seen him perform miracles.
Good. Okay.
We're going to have some shows
He's
in
done.
the coming
He's
weeks
done
where we
things we
explain.
thought
That
never
and
be
green
done.
powder.
All right. I like $1 million right now.
Yeah, that's perfect. We'll
right.
trademark it. He's
So-
the sage. But he's Brandon's been around a lot. We've done a lot of fun stuff. And we continue to do fun stuff.
Great
So
mind.
yeah,
God
he's
bless
popping in more and more up here, which is great. And Tony, this is your first time, so I'm really happy we can get
So
you on.
I'm really honored to be here. I really, first and foremost, this we're going to talk about John LaCorte
Yes.
and the naming of the Verrazzano Bridge, but you people are preserving it for the next generation. You know, but my only prayer is that not only you have this, is that we have to find a way to preserve this history so we're not written out of the history.
Sure.
And they continually write us out. So my prayer for you is that everything that you do somehow, we could formulate an online museum and preserve all that stuff that you.
Do you know my answer to that? Because I've been in this game a long time,
right.
as you have. The only shot we have at that is if the Gen Z crowd picks up the mantle.
Yeah.
So the kids who are
Right.
21,
Exactly.
22, 23.
That's why I was
If they
talking to
and
them.
because even the millennials now are in middle age, but if the
Right.
Gen Z crowd, which is substantially a generation behind us, if they invest in this, then we got another 20 years, and when they're in midlife, they'll have a big group behind them, and they're gonna have to sell them on it. But that's the only. I have found that out. The biggest lesson, one of the biggest lessons I've learned in life, is that you cannot, from beyond the grave, control the future. So you can endow the best. Any kind of philanthropic organization or foundation or institute, and once you're in the cemetery, you're gone, and the people who are in control, they can run it into the ground.
That's why passing on institutional knowledge is so important, right? And I want to get to your career before we talk about LaCorte and Verrazzano, because you've done a lot of that, right? But I think about this a lot with the stuff we do. We travel in some interesting circles around really specific topics, and I'm thinking of a couple of people in particular where, I can get up and pick up the phone and call and talk about the history of two Sicilies with a couple of our friends, or the orders of knighthood of the two Sicilies. This knowledge that these people have, that if it doesn't get institutionalized, codified somewhere, even if it's on video, which is really why we do this show, it's going to be lost, right? So
Yeah,
a lot of our kind of struggle is between being entertainers and educators. You're an educator, and we're always talking about, some of our recordings are, in the old days, were like 5 hours long. They're like oral histories, and making them available is just as important as the product that is finished with the show, right? Because we have we serve two masters here, and you're a filmmaker. Your documentary, at least the one that introduced me to you, is Heaven Touches Brooklyn in July, right? That's about the history of the Giglio Feast in my old neighborhood in Brooklyn. Was that your first film? Where did you start with all this?
No, my first film was way before you were born, called It's All in My Hands, about a neighborhood shoemaker who makes who repairs shoes at 19 years old.
Wow.
And you know what that was about? It's about the need today also, about young people who work with their hands. That is where a lot of people should be focusing on right now, and they are focusing on now. Because, I stand outside, you stand outside the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel and the Midtown Tunnel, and what do you see? People who work air conditioning work, people who services buildings, people, plumbers, electricians, and all these are the noble people of the world. I grew up in Borough Park, Brooklyn. My mother and father were both born and raised right down the street from this Red Sauce studio on Mulberry Street. My mother was 4'11", and my grandfather had a restaurant called the Colombian and the Abruzzese restaurant,
Wow.
right on 55 Mulberry Street.
Wow.
He died before I was born in 1947. But the thing is, what struck me is my mother's capabilities. We lived in a place it was right by a lake, and there was like a hairpin turn, and this kid comes speeding on, and this is in maybe 1957, 56. This kid comes speeding around the corner, and he couldn't make the turn. His head goes right through the windshield. I think it was I remember, I thought it was a Ford convertible. I don't remember, but my mother immediately took charge of the situation, which they can't do today. She took Antoinette Nonno, took this kid in and cradled him and started to pick out the shards of glass in his head.
Oh my gosh.
And you know what she said? And then she says, "You go in and get me a clean sheet in there. You call the police. This is before 911 existed. Sure. You do me a favor, get me some soap and water right away." And she started to attend it, and she said, "Boom, boom, boom, boom." That's what producing and directing is about. That's what it. And I learned from her. She commanded the situation, and that's what I saw. And I didn't realize that for a while. All right, and then my father, interesting enough, was Jerry Nonno. He was a racing editor of the New York Post and a sports writer.
Wow.
So my father was a handicap, and he was known. And let me say this to you. I mean, my father was meticulous and detailed, but he had a name and a reputation. So me, as a young kid, and I don't know if you could identify with your father. I don't know, or your father's, and your father.
I don't even know my father.
But, huh?
I don't even know my father.
All right.
Definitely not.
Is that I tried to be the best I could be. And when we were brought up also too, let me say this to you about making films, is making houses and stuff like that. When I was 10, 11 years old, I couldn't go out and on Saturday and Sunday. You know what we had to do? We had to build gardens. We had to lay cement in there. I know how as at 10 or 11 years old to put outlets in houses, to cut pipes, to do picket fence.
So you were preparing yourself for your filmmaking career and all of this stuff.
Well, it's not so much that I was preparing myself.
They were preparing you.
This is what our Italian tradition prepares us for. And in other words, we had to learn how to cook. We had to learn how to sew. I remember the stories about, like, my great uncles telling the stories how that when they were apprenticing, they would tie their fingers with string. When they were young kids, if they knew that they were going to be tailors or the sons of tailors, and that was stuff that was passed on from the Middle Ages. So in other words, in all small towns, in all cities in Italy and all around the world, people had to be capable of doing a lot of things to survive.
So you had an affinity and an affection for the dignity of labor, right? The dignity of work, the dignity of craftsmanship.
And I not only had affinity for it, but I really promoted that and then respect that.
So you finished your first film, It's All in My Hands, in 1971 in school. You've now worked here on this Italian-American story. 1971 is an interesting time. What's the next sort of jump for you? How do you get from here to projects like we're going to talk about today on John LaCorte or Heaven Touches Brooklyn? When's your first full-length documentary?
Heaven Touches Brooklyn is my major documentary.
Yeah.
But I did 50 documentaries. for
Wow.
television. So, even before that, I did a film called The Kiss of Death, before The Godfather, a spoof on organized crime, which Fred Gardefee called, it was a satire before the negative stereotyping of Italian Americans. And I did that film as a spoof on organized crime because I was angry. This is before. Now, when The Godfather hit, I don't know if you know that, but it was like 1,000 films made until up to the 1990s that portrayed Italian Americans in the media stereotype. And even up until this today, Jack Newfield used to say, and a long, long time ago in the Village Voice in the Times, that the most injustice and defamation of all people in the media is the continual defamation of Italian Americans. And this is all we have to face with. And then I came down with statistics so I know I came down with statistics about that stuff. And what struck me when I was working at the New School, I was working about anti-defamation. I got into anti-defamation, but my whole force of my dedication is to make films, positive image films about our Italian American, but images that really have a sense of humanity, that embrace that are loved and embraced by all people.
Certainly, the force of destiny is, I believe, a big part of how we end up. I mean, just being at this table with these two guys, I can tell you, destiny brings people into your life for sure, and topics and subjects. But destiny brings you here today for a topic that I think is very important. One that you contacted us. I mean, we've known each other now. I've done some stuff together, especially during my time at NIAF. You're around the neighborhood a lot. But you wanted to come in today to talk about John LaCorte and the Verrazzano Bridge, because this year was the 500th anniversary of Verrazzano's discovery of New York Harbor and New York City, right? And it'll be the 60th anniversary this year or next year?
This year,
November 2024,
17th.
November 17th. The 60th anniversary of the naming of the Verrazzano Bridge between Brooklyn and Staten Island, which is a major accomplishment, really, as you've taught us off microphone, down to one Italian American. Why don't you introduce what you're here to talk about today, John LaCorte, and this amazing singular individual, really?
Well, John LaCorte was a singular individual, but had a very similar mission than each and every one of you, and a commitment to each and every one of you. You're talking about nuts about promoting and preserving and codifying our heritage. John LaCorte founded the Italian Historical Society in America in 1949. Okay, John LaCorte was responsible for not only naming of the Verrazzano Bridge, which is an incredible story, but he also got Robert Kennedy and got the support of Robert Kennedy and named the FBI headquarters after Bonaparte. One thing, so there's a statue. He built monuments to history. And
Why don't you explain who Bonaparte was? Because a lot of our listeners won't know.
Yeah, they might think you mean Napoleon
Right.
Bonaparte. But
no, not Napoleon Bonaparte, Charles Bonaparte, who was he got him recognized as the founder of the FBI. And
But John
that was
LaCorte, give us a little
He's
background
Italian
about him,
American.
because
Italian American.
John
LaCorte, give us
here we go.
background about him.
Hey, thank you.
Do you know the most important thing?
Oh, really?
He was a Sicilian
You're part of Jersey
from
City?
Jersey City.
Oh, really?
Yes, from
And
San
then-
Giovanni a Gemini.
And he,
Part of Jersey City.
Yeah, he was. I knew when I heard that. We had that conversation because Tony and I, because San Giovanni a Gemini had a large immigration.
That's right in your
It's
hood.
outside Agrigento.
Okay, so Sicilian from Jersey City, but what's his professional background?
Sure. But it's
Sicilian from Jersey City, but what's his professional background?
So he was also sold insurance, but he devoted his life a lot to getting Antonio Meucci recognized as the inventor of the telephone. In addition, but interesting enough that John LaCorte was born in Jersey City in 1910. He went back to Italy, and during World War II, in that little town, all the orphan children from World War II, from I guess Russia and all those surrounding countries, came into the flooded Sicily in a lot of ways, and he had to give up his bedroom, and that shows the umanità, the sensibility of Italian Americans. And when we think about, one of the things in talking about preserving history, you hear things now still about, like Felipe Metzay says,
All men are created equal.
we hold these truths all
All men are created equal.
are all men created, all independent. His writings as the governor of Maryland and stuff like that inspired Thomas Jefferson, who were friends. And a lot of people don't know that Jefferson and the kite flyer, Benjamin Franklin, and all the things, they were fluent in Italian. That's why Monticello it's called, and that's why they built vineyards. They brought wine. They were drinking wine, similar like what we do. That history and that culture.
more than recognizing Verrazzano, because John LaCorte did his job. And by John LaCorte doing his job, people know who Verrazzano is today.
Right.
I think it's more important to recognize not so much the 500th anniversary of Verrazzano's exploration. Would it be 500 or was 500? Is it 500 this year? I think it's more important at this time to recognize John LaCorte because he was a proto-Italian-American activist. He was one of the first people who jumped into the ring to show the Italian contribution to the United States. I mean, the fact, like you showed in your documentary, everybody was like, who's Verrazzano? And, you know, I don't know, I don't recall if it's in the documentary, but I've read it that, so right, remember, the bridge is opening in 1964. John LaCorte has to battle to have Verrazzano recognized as the man who discovers New York Harbor and does the cartography for the entire East Coast. And people are complaining, who is this guy? It's 400 years ago. Who's going to be able to pronounce his name? How are you going to put it on a map? And it coincides with the assassination of President Kennedy. So there was a big push to turn the Verrazzano Bridge into the Kennedy Bridge. So John LaCorte's battle got even harder when you think about it. But he was a man who laid the groundwork for what we're doing today in the fact of the recognition of Italian-American history as a distinct field of study, right? Because that's so many of the authors and the other people that we brought on, the academics here, you know, they have... they work in that field today because so much of its definition was defined by John LaCorte.
Exactly, and even more so, but John had unrelenting commitment to go down the doors. He banged down the doors. He didn't take no for an answer. He confronted Robert Moses. He took on and he said, Nelson Rockefeller, don't you trust me? He says, no, but I have to get it in writing from you, from Nelson
President
Rockefeller.
Johnson, Rockefeller, Robert Moses. These are titanic people in the sense that they were hard people to. I think they were powerhouses in their day, you know. And John LaCorte stood up to them toe to toe, eyeball to eyeball, and it's kind of like the Mother Cabrini story, right?
Yes.
You have the poor immigrant, Italian immigrant, accented English, against these pillars of the waspy American establishment, going to eyeball, saying we have to recognize this Italian, Giovanni Verrazzano.
It's interesting to me because, you know, learning about John LaCorte, you would think this was a guy who, you know, was an academic and he started the Italian. Is it the Italian American Historical Society, or the Italian Historical Society of America?
Italian Historical Society of America.
Of
I'm
America.
a trustee of that.
Oh, that's good to know. But here's a guy, you know, you would assume an academic background, right? He starts the Italian Historical Society of America, but in reality, as you said, he's an insurance salesman, right? This is a guy who's just passionate, and he doesn't have the academic credentials or the background or the birth, the station, whatever the circumstances he shouldn't be in these rooms, right? By all intents and purposes. And here he is in the White House at some point and making these battles.
Doesn't it condemn us? And I'll tell you why he brings condemnation on Italian America, because he didn't have those things, not because he didn't have the capacity.
He didn't have the opportunity.
He didn't have the opportunity.
Yeah.
So a guy who didn't have the opportunity to be a historian, which I think he would have been, had he been born today or even in our generation, he has insurance, as I call the side hustle,
Yeah.
to be able to pay the bills so he can do all this.
Yeah.
And yet we have so many Italian Americans out there with PhDs and all advanced degrees,
And positions of power.
positions of power from Ivy League institutions, who try to whitewash and pretend they're not part of the tribe,
Yeah.
or do not give back their tithe. They owe a tithe to the Italian community in their academic research and the other stuff that they do to give back. So doesn't he bring a condemnation?
Yeah, it's true.
If everybody did their part,
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds kind of cliches, but think about where we would be.
It also brings me to the point that we always talk about, Pat, about the community and the different generations, because somewhere between, I worked as the president of the National Italian American Foundation. NIAF was really the last major national organization founded, right? But if you think about that, we always say that was started probably by the last guys with a chip on their shoulder who had accomplished great things professionally, guys and gals, be it academics, professionals, Monsignor Baroni priest. I mean, but these are substantial people.
They were the last generation because they were the children of immigrants born around World War I who grew up during the Depression. They were the people who had to leave school at 14.
Right.
Because there were 10 kids at home. Dad died of influenza. Right.
Or if they stood in school, face discrimination.
Face discrimination, or,
Mario Cuomo graduates
right, sure.
St. John's,
We need you
great
to quit
lawyer,
school.
can't get a job.
We can only afford to send one brother to school,
Yeah.
or we need your help on the store and stuff like that.
But the beauty of that is they take that chip, whatever you want to call it, and they channel it into building this amazing organization with the huge endowment. I mean, they really go out, raise all this money. Everything is vibrant. And I think what happens to these organizations is when the next generations come in and they're a little bit less driven, as we see, these organizations start to sort of shrink and atrophy. And that happens, I'm sure, throughout communities in the country. But that's sort of what I feel a guy like John LaCorte is a perfect example of, banging down doors to the White House with zero belonging. And that's what builds real power.
But let me. I have trouble with one big premise right now about talking about that he should have been a historian. Absolutely not. And let me tell you something. Some of the people that are in power and they know and everything, and they know this stuff, that the academics are not the people that I believe in and that John believed in. Let me say this to you. Giovanni Schiavo, do you know about that? 4 centuries of Italian American history. He didn't footnote a lot of things, but he was the most knowledgeable, comprehensive. He traveled in.
But you're saying your premise is incorrect, because I didn't say that. What I'm saying is, if he wanted to be a historian, for that generation born around 1910, that wasn't an option.
Right.
So coming from Italy after the war, coming here, the opportunities for education. I'm going to give you a story to back this up.
I'm going to give you another story.
Right, but you're not understanding what I'm trying to say.
wonderful.
I am not. Yeah, but you're. But hold on. This has to be clarified, because I'm not going down on the record with this the way it is.
Right.
I did not say he was any lesser of a historian. I said that if I never met the man, but to see what he did, I would imagine that he would have wanted his full-time job to be a historian because he loved it. That's the impression I have. But I know that my grandparents' generation did not have that opportunity.
Okay.
So back then, going to high school was a lottery ticket.
Okay. All right. All right. So I'm not saying, so in taking what you just said and listening to you carefully, is first and foremost, he did what he did, and he was an historian. And if he was a historian, that would have tied him up, stuff like that from his life. But let me not take away from a lot of facts about people's lives and about a lot of facts about people's lives. Giannini, in starting the Bank of America, he just came in and did it. He didn't have to be a banker. You don't have to be it to do it, but he lived it and breathed it, and he was a historian all his life. And he was able to do and sacrifice. And I don't know what he did. The money that he had, he wasn't like so endowed to do that. But let me say this to you: the other myth is a lot of the immigrants in East Harlem, for example, which is in East Harlem, the first generation, they were judges and doctors and lawyers that were first generation immigrants from the 1880s that were doctors and lawyers, and they went to Columbia Law School, and they were judges on 116th Street, and I didn't know this stuff. They were already established. They were already
Sure, but
judges.
they were often the exception to the rule.
I'm not saying that.
They were
All
the
right, but what
exception
I'm
to the
saying
rule.
is, but you don't necessarily have to have a college degree to have wisdom in studying.
Not at all. But I'm not.
No, you're
I
missing
didn't.
what he's saying,
You are
yeah.
not. You don't understand what I'm saying at all. That's because I am not saying that. What I'm saying is, today
Right,
you have an opportunity.
right.
Wait, can I translate? I think what Pat's saying is, if John LaCorte was born today
Right.
in our
Sure, correct.
pathway of assimilation, he would be told, "Hey, what's your passion? Go see the guidance counselor. What do you want to study? Oh, you love history? This is the college to go to." That world didn't exist. So what he's saying is,
Right.
if this guy had a passion for history, there was no pathway for him to become professional around it. He had to survive, and that's a different world.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you a story because I'm going down on the ship with this one.
No, wait.
But
we're not,
what
I
I'm
don't
saying is that
want to
right,
battle.
no, I'm not saying bad, but I grew up in a town in New Jersey where there was my friend was in NJIT studying architecture, and there was this old guy who used to ask him 8,000, an old Italian American guy who was born in 1916, who used to ask him all kinds of questions, constant. What are you doing in school? And the guy was a tailor. And my friend was saying to himself, why is this guy asking me? He's always annoying me with all these questions about what I'm doing at school. And one day he said to us, his father died when he was like 12 or 14. And his dream his whole life had been an architect. But because his mother had all these kids, and he was the oldest, he went to become a tailor because that would have fed his family. And he said he dreamed his whole life about being an architect. And this 80-year-old man was asking my friend 8,000 questions. That day changed my life because I realized that in today's society, or even when I went to school, he would have had a chance to fulfill that dream to become an architect. But my grandparents' generation didn't have that opportunity. That's why I say our generation and the ones under us have an obligation to give back because they had the opportunities that those people born around 1910 didn't.
Okay. So, but you know what I want to share then, a little insight in, is the immigrants that came, even if they were grammar school educated, they weren't educated, they spoke immigrant, they spoke broken English. Their education, I don't know if you are aware of it, they were fluent in Latin and ancient Greek. They not only spoke Italian, as a grammar school education, it was equivalent to a college education today. These people came, and when you say, Pat Cooper, and I'm doing a thing on Italian American comedy talk that they were oil paintings. They were not more than oil paintings. Their wisdom, they knew, they had to study. They knew about Greek philosophers and Socrates and stuff like that in grammar school. We don't know this, and this is in the small towns of Italy.
Sure, but my great-grandfather was illiterate.
Right.
And I saw a document he signed once,
Yeah.
and I got choked up because I could see he couldn't write. I could see, and his brother, my mother's first cousin, told me a story where my great-grandfather's brother, who was also illiterate, the two of them could not read or write. He looked at his niece,
Right.
and he said in broken English to her, like, go to school, pay attention, like,
Right.
study this. I didn't have a chance for this. You make sure you study, right? And to me, that's...
He may have had worked in the farming. He didn't have the school, or maybe
Sure, but they didn't have the opportunity.
or maybe he didn't study in school too.
Yeah, but
maybe he didn't go to school.
Italy didn't have a high school system to the 60s?
Yeah.
The 70s? In Italy, if you wanted to go to high school, how many, I can bring in an army of Italian guys from Italy and line them up here who faked that they had a priestly vocation
Right.
because the only free high school education was in the minor seminary. I know a guy who's a chemical engineer now who told me, and it's not Severino, it's another guy, who told me that he was born in 1947 and he was very smart in his town in Salerno. And the priest said to him, Giuseppe, you're too smart not to go to school. And the priest told him, make believe you want to be a priest. I'm going to get you in the seminary. When you come home, walk around in your cassock, but get that education. And he goes, when it's time to go in the major seminary, say you don't want to be a priest anymore. He said he didn't want to be a priest anymore. He got a ticket, came to America, got a college degree, and did tremendously well in life. That's the American dream. That's the thing. But to get back to education, not to go off on a tangent, That's the most important weapon that we have. Education
Right.
is the nuke,
Yeah.
and that's why we should know people about John Cabot, Verrazzano, the Italian explorers. Right? We don't study that anymore. They don't study that in school.
But I think it's interesting to get us back to Verrazzano, right? You know, because I want to talk about John LaCorte, and the knowledge that people do have, even when they did study it. So let's skip to the education system here in the United States in the 1950s and 60s, right? We've talked a lot on this show about Columbus being taken on as a non-British historical figure by the early American government. Verrazzano by the 50s is completely forgotten, and everybody is very happy with the idea that Henry Hudson is the first person from Europe to see these lands because it fits great into the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant narrative of, right, Henry Hudson is that great WASP explorer. And they don't have a lot of great explorers, right? That's their guy, because even John Cabot's really Italian. For LaCorte to then go and take down the only WASP explorer that they can lay claim to in all of these discoveries from Europe into this new world. What a battle that guy. I mean, you did this documentary where they're telling a story about him going to see Robert Moses. For those who are uninitiated, Robert Moses was basically the dictator of New York City and state. I mean, he was in development.
He built all the infrastructure,
built
the
everything,
highways that
bridges,
tore everything down,
highways, tunnels,
and destroyed
a lot. Yeah.
New York.
Italian American communities.
not a great
ran
guy
the
to us.
highways
Yes.
through Italian American communities.
Didn't like Italian American communities.
If you ever
Went
drive
after
on the
them.
BQE
Or
and
the
wonder
Cross
why
Bronx,
it's like
yeah.
a loop-de-loop of a highway,
Yeah.
that's because he whacked every Italian neighborhood.
He did.
He did.
Destroyed
He-
every
he-
single one
he
that he could.
purposely-
And we know
yeah.
he did that purposely.
Williamsburg, East
Sure,
Harlem,
The Bronx.
and Coney Island,
Yep.
and all that stuff.
So to a guy who had an Italian American prejudice, John LaCorte goes to him toe to toe and argues
Yeah.
for Verrazzano.
Okay.
And Moses did that because he felt, in his mind, he was going after organized crime. Right, that was his excuse. But he really did bulldoze through neighborhoods. Not a great friend of the Italian American community. But in your documentary, we see John LaCorte's now this insurance salesman goes into Robert Moses, the most powerful man in this empire state, really, for decades. And Moses apparently says to him, Verrazzano, you can't spell Verrazzano. Nobody can say Verrazzano. And LaCorte quickly replies.
Yeah, he replies, "Can you spell Kosciuszko?"
So-
and that's the bridge. But let me just take away from John LaCorte, because what he wore as his mantle and carried his torch and his sword and his flag he was the founder and the leader of the Italian Historical Society of America. So what I want to say to you, he wasn't just this, and I like to diminish this idea, an insurance sale of one guy. He was the founder and advocate for Italian American causes and injustices, and he did that from even early on. Let me just share and enlighten things about Verrazzano. He was unknown because he was unpublished.
Right.
Now, they built the statue that is on the foot of Manhattan, Giovanni, in 1909. When they inaugurated that statue, it was relatively unknown. The head of the Il Progresso and 25,000 people marched and had a ceremony. This is an Italian-American ceremony to inaugurate the statue. In addition to that, 200,000 people marched in a parade in Lower Manhattan before they had the ticker tape parade. But these people could just show you how we're written out of history and how we're mocked in history. They were armed with all this information about Verrazzano because some of his writings were lost in history. He was the unknown for 4 or 5 centuries because they found his writings just in the 1880s and 1890s and stuff like that. But when these people found it, the head of Progresso and all the scholars and professors, and these were the elite of, these were the knives of those days. Mm-hmm. There's an article in the New York Times, and I read, and then they said, they quote a man named Murphy, and it's talking about say like that, and he poo-pooed and diminished in the New York Times article anything about Verrazzano and stuff like that. But unfortunately, I'm looking for records of what these people were not only armed with, but who they were. The founder of Il Progresso and all these people, all these dignitaries that were there, ambassadors and stuff like that, were there doing ceremonies like they had recently for the 500th or anniversary that you've been, in charge with and celebrating with, And then they write us out in history, and they still write us out in history. And now they're going to come in and they're going to have $1 million celebration supposedly for Hudson's, again, and obliterate us. So my prayer for you, and I'm glad we're here for that. And I first of all, it's not about. And please, if I sound like I'm diminishing stuff, I don't want to diminish it. John LaCorte, he empowered me. He inspired me. You know what he did when I was 17 years old? He made me crazy about a heritage. So when he had a ceremony, he invited me up, and I was in charge of saying the Pledge of Allegiance.
Wow.
And stuff like that. And I saw him, and I didn't realize talking about that, and I felt the injustice. And then, so I felt the injustice too. I'll never forget this. So I lived this Verrazzano Bridge. I lived and saw him, John LaCorte.
Yeah.
And I think, you would absolutely love him and stuff like that. So
Speaking of the Verrazzano Bridge, because, this, I hope the audience understanding the battle this guy undertook, gets the bridge named, right? The Verrazzano Narrows. It's only recently that they finally did the work to correct the spelling, because they misspelled it, right? I don't remember what was the...
There's a missing R.
There
There's
was
a
a-
missing Z.
Z,
They did one R, one Z?
right?
2 R's, 1 Z.
One Z.
Okay.
It was
Should be
missing a
2
Z.
R's, 2 Z's.
Right. So it was missing a Z, if I recall,
Right.
right?
Yes.
And so just 2 or 3 years ago, was it before COVID?
Right.
A couple of young Italian Americans, I don't know who they are, I've seen them on social media, led this charge, and they've now begun the process. I don't know if every sign has been changed, because they do it at their natural
They
shelf
said it
life.
cost $9 million or something like that.
Yeah, but so it basically it went from 1964 to, let's say, 2020
Right.
with the wrong spelling, and basically everybody who was not Italian said, sorry.
The story I
you're
heard
out of
was
luck.
that right before they were going to, you would know better, right before they were going to open it, I guess, I don't know if it was John LaCorte, somebody caught the typo. And they're like, we're not going to go back and change it all now. Just like, shut up and be happy with what you got. So he was missing Z's for 40. He was missing a Z for like 40
Isn't that
years.
crazy? Could you imagine, like, any other, especially nowadays, any other ethnic group, you misspell one of their, heroic figures, and they just go, sorry, guys.
I wouldn't be shocked if that, I don't think that's just an Italian thing.
You think so?
Yeah, I think it's.
You're the South Jersey voice of reason. We're ready for the war panther. Yeah, come after. They're going after
And
us. Get them
obviously,
first.
I'm Italian, but I've had my name misspelled on 75% of the comedy flyers I've been on.
that
That
right?
were a 25-year-old
That was racist.
stand-up.
They're against Italian
But they're
people.
not all. It's not always the last name. So
Really?
I think.
Oh, yeah,
people-
Brendan. You must get Brendan a lot.
I get. You'd think my name was like, something really
Ezekiel?
complicated. Yeah, but it's.
No offense to any Ezekiels out
But
there.
look, I think that sometimes, I don't think Italians are any different than any other ethnicity who hasn't been traditionally the ones calling the shots, right? I think that there's an erasure of history, there's a recency bias,
Yeah, that's fair.
and I think that that's just something you have to overcome. And I think it's people like you. It's not so much that you're fighting against that erasure, so much as that you're illuminating it. You said something earlier, Pat, that I didn't love.
I want to
What did I say?
correct.
Hold on. What did I say?
I'm about to say something smart. But you had said, people should feel condemned, and they should feel... Essentially, there should be shame. I don't think shame's a good motivator for people to preserve this and to give back.
You're a positive person. That's the yin yang.
But it's not just that I'm a positive person.
Yeah, but I want to
I'm an
condemn them.
effective
Nah, I
person.
don't care.
That's true.
I'd rather be
He is
right than
I
effective.
want them to be
rather be-
successful.
That's true.
Yeah, but
rather
why do we
than
have
to
to kiss
feel
up to?
bad.
No, I'm
It's not kissing
understand.
up.
But there's a lot of these people
Listen.
have not done their part.
Here's the
I got
difference.
please help.
Here's-
But no,
no,
I'm
no,
doing
here's the
it.
difference.
They owe.
If you have shame, only works if you have to sit in it. If you can just
You never
turn
went to
around
Catholic
from it,
school.
then you know.
You never went. You never had
You're
a
right, I
nun.
didn't.
You never had a nun.
But once you get out of Catholic school, then you can.
He's right.
I
That
was
makes
never out of
sense.
Catholic school. I went from kindergarten
Unless
to
you're
law
stuck.
school. I had a
Shame doesn't
crucifix
work.
there.
He's right. You're right
What
about
works is somebody like the great work that you're doing and have done for a lifetime is me seeing that inspires me to ask questions and to say, how can I do more than I'm doing, which is very little.
Yeah, but you know, I'm going to go back. I'm going to tell you
No,
why.
you did the meatballs of
I'm going to tell you
comedy.
what you don't see that John and I see.
You represented us.
Slightly,
But John and I have seen Italian Americans in the Ivies and high-end academia who really are embarrassed of their background. Okay. And John and I have seen people change names and stuff, not because they just felt that they didn't want to be known as the meatball eater from Brooklyn. So you agree with me, John? I mean, we don't have to drop certain names.
You made me think of something because when we say change names, some people in the audience think of like the Ellis Island.
Not the Ellis Island. People who voluntarily do themselves.
We're referencing people who like they're born with the name. You know, I'll use Vincenzo and decide not to be Vincenzo to be Vincent. You know what I mean? That kind of stuff. That kind of like.
You know what? Because we've tried to recruit people in those status to come on board in a positive sense, and then you do get feedback from some of them like, I don't want to be seen as an Italian American. Like, I worked really hard to be known as.
And we're sure that that's the Italian American part, not the
right.
with Pat. They don't want to be seen with.
don't want to be
They
with
don't want
us.
to be with. No, you know what? I'll take it away. Maybe they don't want to be with
Couple
me.
of us.
But I think
one or two.
I think that even if they don't want to be with me, I've never heard anyone say that about John. So people triple themselves to be on John's boat. So I think that maybe I just saw a lot of people who were in well-positioned places.
No, you're right. I've seen it.
Yeah, I mean,
who
we've
cares?
seen it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
But
but
you-
you haven't
so
been. You've
somebody
never
doesn't
been.
wanna help.
You're new to this community thing.
Right, but
That's good.
those
to
weren't
have
part of the
non-jaded
solution. Who
outsiders.
cares? Let's
Yeah.
focus on the people who are.
You're going to destroy my life because you want me to be a positive
Oh,
person.
no.
Just take me out and shoot me.
So I don't want you. Could I?
How did I get up in the
go ahead.
morning
Let
now?
the
All right,
guests-
could-
let the guests jump in.
Yeah.
I don't
please.
want to destroy your life. So my prayer is this: is that not for me, but to correct the injustice. So let me talk about one big injustice that struck me about this. You know, when they named the Verrazzano Bridge, you know what the nickname that they came
Guinea
up?
gangplank.
The Guinea Gangplank, and they were able to get away with that now. Now it's called exclusively. We'll make sure it's called the Verrazzano Bridge. People should know about the injustice of mocking these people who had the brilliance of Verrazzano. Let's talk about the brilliance and the schooling of Verrazzano. So my prayer for you is not for us to just tell you and bring light to the podcast. My prayer is for that next generation is to make sure that records are corrected here, unequivocally.
Why don't you tell us what Verrazzano did? Especially if you don't live in the New York metro area, you've never heard of the bridge or really understand
Okay.
it. Why did Verrazzano deserve to have that bridge connecting Brooklyn and Staten Island named after him?
Well, the simple discovery of first of all, he sailed into the harbor, and someone equate that he only sailed into the Narrows. He sailed 11 miles into the harbor. Now, a squall hit and stuff like that, and when he approached the foot of like Manhattan Island, 11 miles in, just then he's seeing Manhattan Island. Don't forget, this is all sand. Verrazzano was able to describe that and discover the Hudson River. Really, it's a misnomer. The Hudson River is a misnomer. He was there, so Verrazzano came in and he immediately identified, and this is not known to most people, that the Hudson River is not a river; it's an estuary, meaning salt water, right? Flows all the way up to the Bear Mountain Bridge and stuff like that. But he, as the wisdom and what Verrazzano deserves, he epitomizes the depth and the wisdom and the knowledge of the Italian explorers who were the franchise sports stars of the age of discovery. And these people, their knowledge of navigation, of science, of the old world and the new, of trading, of shipping, they were men of commerce. They were scientists too. And so now when you read about Henry Hudson, they say he's a scientist. When you read in Wikipedia about, he discovered New York Harbor, but when it comes to Verrazzano, but he had, there's some inaccuracies or something incorrect about it. I forget what it says that. This is what we have to fix here and show the wisdom of it. So what Verrazzano, he mapped the West Coast. He discovered Block Island and Narragansett Bay. But you know what was really struck me about him? is that his description and interaction of the native with Native Americans and stuff like that was so profound. One thing that when he was traveling, and then he would write these little comments. It's a short little page that he wrote about that. He heard the Native Americans howl during a death ritual, and he equated that, and you'll appreciate it as a Sicilian, to the Sicilian. I forget what it's called now. It's on the tip of my head. The Sicilian cries for mourning. He equated that, and then he noticed the different coloration of the natives he experiences all the way up, and he compared that, the description of their women, for example, similar to the coloration of the women in Egypt. So he had that literally life experience of living that. His sublime interaction with these natives were so profound, and they came on board, they fed each other, and they exchanged. And then there was a little article that I said corrected. One person felt the same way that I did, and I like to share those quotes about him writing, is that when you see his writing, the depth of wisdom and intelligence and knowledge and compassion and that sense of humanity, for me, is speaks of Columbus. It speaks of Vespucci. It's because these people, let me say this to you, these people were able to command ships mutiny-free and do repeat voyages, not only to succeed in pinpointing their destination, making 4 voyages, and that goes for Giovanni Caboto, that goes for Sebastian Caboto, and Verrazzano, they were able to. They were not only the franchise players, but they were given millions of dollars in those terms. And why did the kings and queens of the age of invention choose those Italians? You know why? Also, they had the history of the merchants of Venice and controlling commerce and banking, underwriting commerce. So these people were wise in investing in banking and then filling up cargo ships. So he goes to Brazil and brings back redwoods because that's needed. But he could figure out that how much he could put in a ship so he could get his crew back home and get his ship back home. And he knew how to measure the calculating even in the ship. He was always a shipper.
It is true to think about. We talk a lot about Italian American history in terms of the immigrant experience, and it's a debate which, thankfully, we don't have time for on this episode. But about the idea of holding Columbus up versus holding up the more sort of related immigrant ancestors. That Columbus comes so many years before the mass migration, and with this like proto-Italian Americans, and the explorers come from different parts and different experiences and whatnot. And we are going through a debate in our community as to who we really should be holding up as our heroes, right? But when you do think about the age of exploration, one thing I will give, and I tend to be on the side of the kind of let's hold up our immigrants and Italian Americans who stayed here and things like that. But I will give to the explorers of the age. Imagine. And this is not to diminish what they did, but look at the celebration. We sent a man to the moon, right? These guys came back. They set foot, 2 of them, I think 3 at the first one, set foot on the moon, came back. Imagine having to be the financier of NASA, right? You have to raise the money for NASA, having to understand how to pilot the ship, having to understand what needs to go into the. You have to pick the crew. Like these guys they had one role. And they were forever superheroes.
Neil Armstrong didn't do all that?
That's what I'm saying. I don't think that was in his job description. I don't think he didn't build the ship.
He wasn't crunching the budget numbers?
No, I don't think he was like, how am I going to get the gazillion dollars to blast, right? Like, think of all the things that these guys had to independently do, and then go out into a world where the Apollo journeys they were monitored, right? That's the great thing about the movie Apollo 13. They could communicate here, do this. These guys
tethered.
Yeah, you were tethered and through communication. These guys were just out in the middle of nowhere, and they, they knew the moon was there. They didn't know where they were going. So all of the sort of rock stardom that we hold or was held, especially in like the late 60s, early 70s for space exploration. Can you imagine what it was to just sail off into the ocean and really have no clue? No clue. I mean, it's amazing.
Well, they had a lot of clue, but what I'm just saying to you, what strikes me, I don't know if there's any other time in history that people possessed what these navigators possessed. And I want to talking about that. Not only that they have now, first of all, today, even today, with the sextant in hand and with their knowledge of the constellations of the stars and their calculation, they could sail anywhere, any ship today, these age of exploration navigators, even though that they didn't have, not that they didn't have any clue when they were discovered, but once they discovered and they found land, they calculated and they mapped that distance and stuff like that. But what I'm saying to you is that these people had on all levels, when you're talking about experts, astronomy, science, navigation, commerce. You understand?
Yeah,
I mean,
course.
I'm talking about
Politics, yeah.
these people were also, because the merchants of Venice and all those people, they had the wisdom of the world of this whole operation, and they were trained so comprehensively. Now, when you're talking about the stuff and things, what strikes me is, I don't know the story about Charles Lindbergh crossing the Atlantic, right? And they lost radio contact. And then he came across. So I talk about the story about Verrazzano. And I looked at the story, and I never knew the story. So when I read it, I always try, when I read about history, I try to, I don't know if you do that the same way, as I try to be in the viscera and the guts of the characters of Verrazzano. Here was Verrazzano, and then he talked about, he said, he experienced a storm like no other in the world. And then I discovered that the nor'easters in the Atlantic Oceans are the fiercest storms in the world. They just developed these caravels. Now, this caravel, if you can imagine, is that I think 700 or 200 could fit into the Titanic, and now some of these container ships are hundreds of Titanic.
Are these ice cream cakes? What's a caravel?
Titanic caravel.
Yeah,
What is it?
Oh, the caravel
It's a type of
is a sailing ship.
Okay.
Is a sailing ship
Not a-
and stuff
not
like
an ice
that.
cream
And
cake.
Portuguese,
No, I was
and
confused.
it actually sometimes they feel that the design comes from there. So they were only like.
The ships were much better designed. They were a big technological improvement, and they made it much easier to come across the Atlantic in the age of discovery.
They say it was much better designed, but still, it's only like 70 feet. So what I'm saying to you is, now imagine, so then I saw this thing and I read about the storms, about the description of the nor'easter. And they have 60 feet waves and stuff like that. But this is a 75-foot boat. So it's not even like a toothpick in a bathtub, for example, that what a thing. This is like in a giant washing machine. So they and the last thing of a nor'easter is 12 to 18 hours. So he faced something that he never faced. Now they do have it, and you can see the ship that sunk off the coast of the big yacht that recently sunk off the coast of South Italy and stuff like that. I mean, in a storm in Southeast Italy, in the nor'easters in.
Let me tell you. You ever been in a storm on a ship?
Yeah.
I was in a ship going from. I think I was going from Sicily to Genova, and we got stuck south of Sardinia. Was it? I'm trying to think of where. Anyway, wherever I was, I guess there's the certain wind pattern that comes up from North Africa. I've never experienced anything as scary as that in my life. Waves coming over this boat. I don't know how these guys did it. I don't know how they survived. Out into the wild of this stuff.
So, I mean, what I'm saying, he said, I mean, he was in the Mediterranean. He was sailing for 40 years and stuff like that. He said it was the most, but imagining how, that you thrust down 6 stories, trussed up for 12 to almost 48 hours. And then coming out of that and then writing your course and still getting back on a course and still traveling towards the new world.
That's amazing.
I mean,
and your passion, it really is amazing. And your passion for this is infectious. We're coming at the end of our hour, but I have to say, you, as you always do with the stuff you love, your passion becomes an enchantment around the topic. I do desperately want to do more research on my own into Verrazzano because I didn't know any of this stuff really, other than the misspelling. But more importantly, I'm really excited in the future to research John LaCorte because I think the story that I'm most attached to, again, it's like the hero versus my kind of personal hero. I love the fact that this guy.
So we got to preserve his.
Yes.
We got to preserve him on the thing. We got to preserve his history because it's coming up now. We got to let the world in New York and the world media know about John LaCorte's accomplishment in the naming of the Verrazzano and who and what he did and stuff like that.
So that's November
17th.
Yes, November 17th is going to be the 60th anniversary. And we're going to make sure we have not just this, but other opportunities to tell that story and really dig deeper because what a beautiful story. And the thing I love about our show is being able to have somebody like you come who knew John LaCorte and was impacted by him. And that's the apostolic succession, you know, that's the passing on of history. Yeah, I really like that. So thank you for coming in.
No,
Tony.
I am honored to be here, and I thank each and every one of you to be here and stuff like that. And I just want to make sure you don't plug a hole in the ship and keep it afloat.
Keep it afloat.
Really,
Amen.
no, really, all kidding aside,
You're right,
God bless you all.
Thank you, Tony.
And thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you for getting the ship this far to hand it off to us and our generation. We'll do the best we can for sure. And now that you know Tony Nonno, make sure you take a look on our show page here on the YouTube in the description, all of our links to his fine work and the articles that we reference and things like that, because Tony's done a yeoman's work as a Renaissance man. Flash that again. Show him there, Nikki. Camera on Tony. Renaissance man, Renaissance man, Renaissance man. But he really has been, and he's been a great one.
And I know we're wrapping up, and this might not make the thing, but I'm curious, what's your white whale that's still out there?
Oh, that's a good
at
question.
this stage of your career? What's the story that you haven't told that you think needs to be? What's next?
I'm doing a film on the legacy of Italian American comedy in America, which is really the foundation of. And Farfarillo down the street here.
You guys got to do
built that
lunch.
stuff.
Yeah,
I
you
know.
definitely got to do lunch.
That's true.
Right.
Yeah. Brandon is
Comedian.
Yeah,
comedian,
I know.
but
I
also
already talked to him about
we're
it.
involved
but
in the documentary business together.
we got to
so,
get Paul Costibile on, and he does his shows, and we're going to hook him up too with more people. And you may have done shows for him, and you weren't aware. That's a guy that you got to do.
Yeah.
Work with it. You know.
That'd be great. Yeah.
The Italians of comedy. This is a good topic.
Yeah.
Which we referenced in our past episodes together. We talked a lot about the history of Italian comedy in two parts out of Jersey, and we were still recording in Jersey. Yeah. Two Jersey guys here. But for me as a Brooklynite and you as a Brooklynite, we at Balanced Table here. So from one Brooklynite about another, Tony Nonno, a fantastic Italian-American. Thank you. Deservedly so, Renaissance man in the community. Thanks for coming on. Hope you guys have enjoyed this. Make sure you keep in mind November 17th is the anniversary. We'll keep posting about what's coming up, where the official celebrations, recognitions as they come. But you do your part, as Pat would say, and go out and tell this story. It's a great story. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
If you want your life to be great, see that you're born an Italiano and your life will be great. See that you're born an Italiano.